Tonight we welcome Zac Trahan, and last time we talked about the need to kind of check your own reality and how important it is to have somebody to do that with. And if you are very, very lucky in your organizing life, you will find somebody like this that you can send into a meeting or be your second pair of ears and eyes in anything that happens, and trust their judgment explicitly and implicitly. And this is the way that I found Zac Trahan after quite a story of getting to that point that over a 20-year period when he was just a child, which if you want to come to the bar afterwards, I'll explain how really remarkable this friendship is in light of the context that it took place in at the time, the political context. It is really quite remarkable. Nevertheless, he fulfilled that role for me. Whenever I thought I was off my rails or going someplace I shouldn't, I would check in with him, and he would either alert me to that fact and confirm it or say, no, you're right, and vice versa. I have to also say that this thing that we're going to be talking about is something that has an advantage because I am old. I was around 20 years ago for the first fight over hazardous waste incineration in Dallas and zoning of that. Which is another irony because the place that was centered around is now a Monty Anderson economic development site that's being rehabilitated in the middle of Oak Cliff. But at the time it was burning hazardous waste, and it caused a big uproar about burning hazardous waste in the middle of Dallas neighborhoods and where you should be allowed to do that. And so Lori Palmer, who was the North City Council person at the time and later became Dallas Food Bank president and so on, she took it upon herself to have a commission, a look at zoning for hazardous waste incineration and medical waste incineration in Dallas. And through this process, which Anna Albers, by the way, was a part of as well, because that was her neighborhood, she threaded this needle, and it's a wonderful thing to watch her work because she knew what she was doing. I didn't catch on until about halfway through because that was one of the first things I ever did. But she wasn't going to ban hazardous waste incineration in Dallas. That would be anti-business. But she was going to keep it out of the neighborhoods, quote unquote. And by the time they wrote the ordinance, it was out of everywhere. Parks, churches, daycare centers, everywhere. They had just done that, and it was beautiful. And you have never seen another hazardous waste or medical incineration fight in Dallas since 1989. So that's the frame of mind I was in when I approached this fight. Right? You want to ban fracking or not? And that's the historical context I put in. I will also say that if you think about what we just heard and talked about and how you use words, banning anything, I don't care what you're talking about, puts the anus if you're a ticket listener, puts the onus on you as an activist to justify banning. It's an extremist behavior, right? It could be a bad thing that you're banning slavery, right? It's a great thing that you're doing, but it sounds extremist. Versus protecting parks and people or passing the most protective ordinance, then you put then the policymakers have to justify their safety, right? It puts the responsibility on them to ensure the safety and justify the placement of facilities away from people, out of harm's way. From you can't do that anywhere to you can only do that where it's safe. Now, if it's only safe 1,000 miles from anywhere, that's just the tough business of politics, but that's the way it goes. So that's the context I want you to think about.
Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. Thanks all y'all for being here. As for those who haven't met me, I'm Zac Trahan. I've been working with Texas Campaign for the Environment since 2002, and I was here as the Dallas Program Director from 2012 till 2015. Yeah, immediately before Corey took over. And what a wonderful job Corey is doing now. Much better than I was at the time. As Jim said, this photo kind of was everywhere, so apologies for using it again. This idea that perception is all important is not a new invention that somehow modern geniuses have come up with, although Leonardo da Vinci, in the grand scheme of things, could be considered a modern genius. And as Jim just kind of laid out, the very first decision that was made before I even got to Dallas, because this fracking fight was already happening in Dallas a year or two before I got here. And the very first decisions that were made at the time were whether to be this or whether to be the moderates in the room. Because this decision of whether to publicly push for banning fracking in Dallas versus passing a strict gas drilling ordinance in Dallas, that decision kind of laid everything out from there on and was the most difficult discussion in terms of the internal conflict that it caused, the fights amongst ourselves. If you can imagine a room just like this with some similar number of people or some even fewer people fighting it out over this, and then coming to a decision saying, okay, we're going to go for this ordinance, and then 2 years later, 3 years later, having the same fight and people having really hard feelings over it at the end of the day, and literally splitting off and forming their separate organizations over that because of the kind of moral, ethical, and kind of deep personal beliefs that it brings up. So this decision, it's more than just kind of framing the debate publicly. It's also about who you are as a person, and it can lead to some real deep divisions among who you think are your closest friends. So I don't want to there's no way to kind of oversell just how difficult this can be and what it can lead to when you make a decision like this. But making that decision and sticking with it for 3 or 4 years is the only reason that we won. At one point in this fight, the mayor went into the newspaper and said, this deal is already done. They're going to drill if they want to drill, or they're not going to drill if they don't want to drill, but it's their choice. The deal was cut. It's all decided already, and it's just up to the drilling company now whether or not to do this. And when we saw this in the paper, we realized kind of what we're up against. Because when you have the mayor saying that, that's the mayor essentially projecting power, saying, no, all these groups that are fighting against it, they have no power in this. They have no power to change anything. And how you fight power is through organizing your own power and then outmuscling the opposition. And one way to do that is to frame the debate in a way that builds as much support for your position as possible publicly until you have more power than your opposition. And that's why framing and imagery and the words that you choose and the position that you choose is so important. You're on a battlefield, you have to choose the high ground if you're going to beat your opposition. And so picking your site is picking your position. And the words that you choose to describe your position is how you establish your position. So when we kind of said about this, then the notion of don't frack on city parkland, that was a central message, but it's also about having it right next to neighbors. How close is too close? If you live in a community, how close would you want a gas drilling rig or drilling operations or air pollution, water pollution? No one wants anything in their backyard, and people can identify with that in a way that is what everyone probably knows. The term NIMBY is universal, right? But it's being able to then put people in someone else's shoes to say, I wouldn't want that in my backyard, so I don't want someone else to have to deal with that either. And this is how we're able to have lots and lots of people and organizations who have no problem at all with oil and gas drilling, who are in the industry, who have been in the industry their whole career, their family's been in the industry. And that's the thing about DFW. Everyone either is involved or knows someone who is involved in this industry. And so you can't just vilify the industry and say, we're going to ban your industry. It's like saying we're going to ban mom and apple pie. But even then, they can agree, well, they wouldn't want it in their own backyard. Sometimes you're gifted these images. This is a slide that came from the gas industry, from one of their presentations that they were giving to City Council, where they had this photo to explain to, I don't think it was City Council, I think it was the City Plan Commission, which is like Dallas's zoning commission, to say, okay, this is what we're talking about, folks. It's not some spooky zombie boogeyman operation. Look, this is what's happening in Fort Worth, and it's not hurting anyone. It's fine. It's kumbaya.
The lovely landscaping.
Precisely.
They always want to talk about the landscape.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's screened. See
Exactly.
the trees here on the sides, so it's not, yeah, absolutely. But for you and I, when we see this slide, it does the opposite, right? What do you see in the picture? What's the first thing that you see?
Proximity.
I see a church and a baseball.
An opportunity to hit a home run that might have some consequences.
So sometimes, you don't even have to arrange this yourself. You can just, if you see an opportunity for an image, for a frame that the opposition is presenting, sometimes it's just a matter of pouncing on that. The other thing about it is, what do you see in terms of the drilling? You see a drilling rig, and that's what people think when you hear the term oil and gas drilling, right? And this was actually sort of something we had to overcome because the industry wanted to portray this. Like, the drilling rig is the iconic thing. And there was a billboard in Fort Worth at some point that had a picture of a drilling rig, something like "smells like money," or fresh money. They fetishize this rig, but we want people to see beyond that and to see the reality of the industry in their community. And so the kind of picture that we use for this, this is what Jim started calling a refinery, and we turned it a mini refinery to kind of hedge a little bit on that. But the word refinery stays, and that's important, because this is a compressor station. This is a gas compressor station.
But it also had dehydrators and all
amine
kinds
boilers
of other things
and all kinds of technical sounding, scary sounding equipment that you can see along the site of this. But this is an industrial operation that's going to spew tons and tons and tons of pollution into the air every year, like routine pollution and crap, toxic crap in the air. And this is not the portrayal that the oil and gas industry wants. They just want to show you the rig, and they say the rig will be there for a couple weeks and then it'll go away, and then there'll just be this tiny little thing we call a Christmas tree because we're Frank Luntz wordsmiths that's left over. And no one wants to talk about that facilities like this are really what's left over, because this is how they can actually transport the gas from place to place, refine it. The other thing about the floodplain is that the Trinity River floods. So this is a picture from Colorado during flooding in a gas operation there. We wanted the kind of decision makers especially to see this. And it's something where most folks in Dallas, at least, not speaking for Fort Worth because their Trinity River is beautiful, our Trinity River in Dallas is not so beautiful in some places, has been used as an industrial dumping ground for decades, which is why. But not a lot of people actually go down there on a regular basis. So we wanted, really, when you say drilling in the Trinity River floodplain, you're not going to really connect with the average resident. But with the decision makers, this was an important image because the gas industry representatives, when they would go and talk to the zoning committee and the city council, they would always say, look, the drilling's not going to happen in the floodplain. We're going to have these platforms. We're going to temporary platforms for the equipment. And that way, if it rains really hard, if it floods in the floodplain, none of the gas drilling equipment, the industrial equipment, this stuff is not going to be flooded out like you see in this picture. That's not how we're going to do it here, because we're not going to endanger the Trinity River that way. However, those of us who reviewed the site plans that the industry submitted to City Hall, you go to the 5th floor, you pay like $1, they give you a CD with all these site plans and all these documents and all this technical language. And you review the site plan itself, the little architectural blueprints or whatever it is that they have. Those platforms only cover the temporary equipment that's there during the drilling phase and not the tanks and the boilers and the separators that are stay there afterwards. So the things that you see in the picture here that are underwater, except for the drilling rig itself, are underwater in Dallas as well if they drill here. So to be able to have an image like this and then have an image of the site plan and go to the decision makers, because the zoning commission in Dallas, the city plan commission, these are citizen volunteers. These are resident volunteers. They're not technical experts. They're not elected officials who know this stuff backwards and forwards. And when they have industry experts going to them, engineers going to them saying, here's how we're going to do this, they tend to kind of believe that by default. And part of our role was to be able to show them that's not how it's going to work. So when I got to Dallas, at least, this fight had already been going on for a couple of years, like I said, and the drilling sites themselves were kind of known where they planned to drill in a few places near neighborhoods, in a few places on city-owned parkland along the river. But there wasn't sort of a map of all these places for the whole city of Dallas perspective at the time, at least. And a city council member had the city staff put this together. What do you see here? What's the green? I mean,
Parks.
Parks. Is that just a big giant city park that Dallas has? Wouldn't that be awesome if it was?
Someday, without a tollway.
Yeah.
Underwater tollway.
But for residents, for average residents, when they see this, I mean, green means park. And so they see a map of their neighborhood. The green area is the park area. So for a lot of folks, that green means just parks, and they don't know if it's a city park or not. But this map, this information, by the way, everything that's shaded black right there, everything with the black hash, that's land that was leased to the drilling companies. It's the green area specifically that was leased to the gas company. And that in and of itself is infuriating, right? And that's all you need to know. And in fact, when the city council member released this map and gave it to us, and we helped give it to the reporters that we were working with, that was enough. We sent them an email, a press release with this map attached, and then they're calling the office saying, can we come over to your office and interview you? It's not like we're having a press event, we're holding a protest, we're holding a demonstration, we're holding a press conference, we're inviting them to come. No, we just email them this map and they call and say, can we come over and put you on TV tonight? So the imagery of drilling in parks became the kind of central opportunity for us. And the decision to go after that as opposed to going after banning fracking, gave us the opportunity to win the fight later. This sign, it was a 50-cent sign that ended up being everywhere as well. There is a news equivalent of going viral, and that is if this picture shows up in more than 5 different stories over more than 2 years, it's officially viral. I don't know what it is, but the Dallas Observer took this picture and then used it in every story that they ever wrote about fracking after that, essentially. And our rig is in the background, but the sign and the facial expressions, it's just so personal, You need people identify with people. So sometimes the images that you use, you need to be able to put a human face on the emotion that you're working to capture. You need to take pictures of everything that you do and then be able to use those pictures. If you don't take pictures, it did not happen. This was in front of City Hall on the day that the City Plan Commission voted. They've scheduled this vote on December the 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, to vote on these drilling sites. The little orange dots, you see the little orange ones at the top? Those are the first couple of drilling sites that they were planning on voting on. Right. And they scheduled the vote on whether or not to grant the permits to drill in those 2 places on December 22nd. So, that's a way to include the public right there. We showed up with as many people as we could with the drilling rig right out in front of City Council. We went inside. Everyone testified at the City Plan Commission. They denied the permits by a 7-6 vote on the City Plan Commission. No one knew how that was going to go down before going into that.
That's why you never like surprises. Because that one will take about a year off of you.
Yeah.
Because we didn't know.
We had no idea.
We had no expectation of winning that fight. Because we were prepared to go to the council to the next level after they approved it. So winning it was a surprise.
So then it's Christmas. Yay! It's a holiday. We just had a great, huge gift, right? But while we were all, going and hanging with families and celebrating this massive, unexpected victory, the City Plan Commission, the chair of the City Plan Commission, started calling around the other commission members, and they figured out a parliamentary trick where they could, if they had a certain window of time, I think it was 3 weeks after the vote, they could call in and reconsider that vote that they'd taken. So when we got back, they decided, we're going to reconsider that vote.
It's a do-over vote.
Yeah, let's just try again. The vote didn't turn out the way we thought it would the first time. So we're going to try again and see if we get it right this time. And the chair was calling the different members, lobbying them, twisting arms. But importantly, there were 3 of the commission members who weren't able to be there for that second vote, which was held in early January, like a week after New Year's. And without those 3 folks, we all turned up in force again to the meeting, and we lost that vote 6-5, where they voted to reconsider the permit. This wasn't a vote to permit the drilling sites. This was just a vote on whether to do another vote on those permits. So it was a vote to set another vote. And we lost that one 6-5. But this is an important thing about framing. People need to know who the good guys and bad guys are in this fight. And if a vote goes that way, you need to establish a public record that the bad guys won that fight. You need to kind of show and establish on the permanent record that the wrong people won that vote. And the way we did that is that I made all these signs in the office before going, knowing we may well lose because 3 of our allies who had helped win the last vote were not going to be there. We made a bunch of these little signs that some of them said shame and some of them said sham. And everyone got up and stood up and started chanting and disrupted the whole meeting when that vote happened 6-5. And that was what was on the news that night. So even though we lost the vote, we still kind of were able to demonstrate to the public and frame the debate.
In fact, the
So-
chant was on the news on every channel, I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. So that way, people who are watching can see, oh, something bad just happened.
And it wouldn't have been picked up otherwise.
It may have been picked up. I mean, it was this fight was all over the news no matter what. But knowing that all the cameras are going to be there, having kind of one chance to share one message, if there's going to be one picture that gets shared, what's it going to be? And in this case, this is what we wanted to be the one picture that people would see. Because people who are watching the news at home, they're not watching the whole story and sitting there and paying really close attention and taking notes. They're just passing through. Like they're making dinner over here, they're doing this over here, and then they come through and they see, oh, there's a bunch of people chanting and there's a sign that says shame. Oh, something bad just happened. What's this about? Oh, gas drilling, yeah. Okay. So sometimes you only have this long to make your point, and that's why framing is so important. So we ended up kind of coming up with 4 or 5 different demands that we wanted in the city ordinance itself. And this is an important part of framing the debate to say not just what you're against drilling in parks, you're against drilling in neighborhoods, you're against drilling in floodplains. You have to say what you're for, and you have to say that in a really simple way that everyone can understand and that you can repeat over and over and over to the point where you can say it backwards and forwards, memorized at any time. And we knew that we were not going to get all of these things in the city ordinance either. But if we could distill it down to 4 or 5 things, even if we would only end up getting 1 or 2 of them in the final ordinance, that would be enough to accomplish our goals. And that's what happened. We only got 1 of those demands actually made it into the final ordinance. But that was enough.